What happens when someone trades true love for a passing obsession? Helena dedicated her life to Eduardo, but all she received was criticism and humiliation. When he abandons her for a younger woman, it seemed like their story would end in ruins. But destiny is full of surprises. Helena finds strength where she least expected it and proves that true value is beyond appearances. As she is reborn, Eduardo discovers the bitter price of his choices. Are you ready for a story of twists and turns, profound lessons, and a victory you won't forget? Helena, have you been looking in the mirror lately? Eduardo asked, leaning against the bedroom doorframe. His expression was one of impatience. Helena turned around slowly, holding the comb she used to fix her hair. What do you mean by that? I mean you're getting careless. Those lines on your face weren't there before. He pointed with a vague gesture. She took a deep breath, trying to contain her anger and humiliation. I'll do everything you ask, Eduardo. Not enough? Not yet. Effort is not enough if results do not appear. He shrugged and left the room without waiting for a response. Helena looked at her reflection in the mirror. Behind her tiredness, there was still a sparkle in her eyes that she tried to maintain. But Eduardo's words echoed in her mind, like a sentence she could never escape. Shortly after, the two went out for another morning of hazing. Eduardo ran vigorously while Helena tried to keep up. His steps were heavy, and the morning cold made his lungs burn. "Hurry up, Helena!" Eduardo shouted without slowing down. She stumbled slightly but regained her balance, forcing her legs to move. Her breathing was uneven, and sweat was running down her face, but she didn't dare complain. "I'm not young like you, Eduardo," she said, panting. "Stop using that as an excuse." "It's a matter of discipline." He turned to look at her over his shoulder. "Do you think I like getting old? I'm fighting this. You should do the same." Helena felt tears threatening to escape, but she kept her focus on the floor in front of her. When they finally arrived home, Eduardo went straight to the kitchen while Helena collapsed on the sofa. "There's an ice bath tonight," he announced casually. "Eduardo, I can't continue like this." She spoke in a low but firm tone. He stopped, looking at her as if she had said something absurd. "Of course you can. It's for your own good, Helena." "You know that?" His words sounded like an empty echo, devoid of compassion. Helena knew she couldn't argue. That night, as he immersed himself in the bathtub filled with ice cubes, his body shook not only from the cold, but also from despair. The next day, during another run, Helena felt that her legs would not support her for long. Every step felt like a superhuman effort. Eduardo ran ahead, oblivious to her condition. Suddenly, everything went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital bed. A nurse adjusted the IV next to her, while a doctor checked a monitor. "What happened?" asked Helena in a weak voice. "You collapsed from exhaustion," explained the doctor. "She's dehydrated and needs to rest." Helena felt a mixture of relief and shame. He was finally away from Eduardo's demands, but he knew that this would only be temporary. Helena observed the white ceiling of the hospital while listening to the muffled sound of footsteps in the corridor. She felt empty, as if she had left a part of herself in that race. When Eduardo entered the room, she noticed the casual expression on his face, as if the visit were a formality. "How are you?" he asked without emotion. "How do you think?" she replied with a bitter tone. "I passed out because my body couldn't take it anymore." Eduardo shrugged. "Maybe it's time to take your health more seriously." Helena blinked in disbelief. "Taking my health seriously? That's exactly what brought me here." Before he could respond, a young nurse entered the room. Her name, Laura, was embroidered on her uniform. She carried a clipboard and a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Helena. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Helena replied, trying to ignore her discomfort in Eduardo's presence. Laura turned to Eduardo, her smile remaining. "And you, sir, is everything okay with your health?" "Of course," replied Eduardo with a charm that Helena recognized immediately. "I need to take care of my shape. It's not easy to maintain this pace." Laura laughed softly. "I imagine not." Helena clutched the sheet between her fingers, feeling a silent anger grow. When Laura left, she faced Eduardo. "What was that?" he asked without hiding his irritation. "That what?" Eduardo shrugged. "I was just being polite." "You seem to be flirting." He laughed, shaking his head. "Don't be ridiculous, Helena. Maybe she's overdoing it because she's tired." Helena turned her face away, swallowing the words she wanted to say. Days later, when she was discharged, Eduardo didn't show up to pick her up. She left the hospital alone, crestfallen, but relieved to return home. When she walked through the door, Eduardo was already waiting for her. But instead of welcoming her, he got straight to the point. "I want a divorce." Helena froze. "What?" "I need a new life, someone to accompany me." He looked her up and down as if she were a worn-out object. "We are no longer compatible, Helena." She felt tears burning her eyes, but she held on tight. "And who would this new life be? Laura?" Eduardo gave a cold laugh. "It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is that this—" He gestured between them. He finished. Helena tried to argue, but Eduardo seemed implacable. He offered the house as part of the deal, as long as it made the divorce easier. "I accept," Helena said finally, her voice low but firm. Eduardo, relieved, began to pack his things in the following days. When he finally walked out the door, Helena was left alone, surrounded by memories and an overwhelming silence. In the weeks that followed, she struggled with the weight of abandonment. The days were long and lonely, but little by little, Helena began to find strength in small actions. Cleaning the house, tending to the garden, reconnecting with friends I had neglected. She promised herself that, despite the pain, she wouldn't let Eduardo destroy what was left of her life. Eduardo was radiant in his new life with Laura. The two seemed inseparable, frequenting luxurious gyms, trendy restaurants, and exclusive parties. He displayed the young woman like a trophy, while she enjoyed the lifestyle he provided. "Nadie, you're incredible, Eduardo," said Laura, while trying on an expensive necklace he had bought for her. "But I think this ring would look perfect on me too." Eduardo laughed, uncomfortable. "Let's go slowly, Laura. I've already spent a lot this month." "Oh, Eduardo, don't be so strict. Life is to be enjoyed." He sighed, begrudgingly agreeing, but felt the weight of the situation. His expenses were skyrocketing, and his bank account was starting to suffer the consequences. Months passed, and Eduardo began to notice Laura's incessant demands. More and more shoes, luxurious dinners, and expensive trips became the norm. He tried to keep up, but the stress started to get to him. "Don't you think you're exaggerating a little, Laura?" he asked during dinner. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Exaggerating? Eduardo, I'm just living the life you promised me." He tried to laugh, but he knew he was at his limit. One day, while doing a hard workout at the gym, Eduardo felt tightness in his chest. He stopped immediately, sitting down on a bench to catch his breath. The coach approached. "Is everything okay, Mr. Eduardo?" "Yes, I just need a minute," he replied, although he knew he wasn't there. The incident was the first clear sign that her body was no longer keeping up with her grueling lifestyle. But Eduardo ignored the warnings. He continued to push his physique, trying to hide Laura's difficulties. "You're getting slow, Eduardo," Laura joked one day while he was trying to join her in a workout. "I'm fine," he insisted, but the tiredness was evident. Eventually, the inevitable happened. During another training session, Eduardo passed out. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed severe exhaustion and warned him that he needed to completely change his routine. However, for Laura, Eduardo's hospitalization was the beginning of the end. "You'll need time to recover, won't you?" she asked while holding his hand in the hospital. Yes, but I'll be fine. I just need rest, she sighed, letting go of his hand. Eduardo, I can't live like this. I need someone who can keep up with my pace. Laura, please. I'm really sorry. I need to go. Laura left him that night without looking back. Eduardo was alone in the hospital, staring at the white ceiling and feeling the crushing weight of his choices. Without financial resources and unable to return to work at the gym, Eduardo faced his worst reality. He was broke, alone, and in poor health. It was then that he decided to return to Helena. She was always by my side, he thought, as he gathered the courage to look for her. Helena was sitting on her balcony, contemplating the garden that was beginning to bloom. Taking care of plants had become a form of therapy, something that helped her find balance. She was holding a cup of tea when she heard a timid knock on the door. "I'll answer, love." The voice of Gabriel, his new partner, came from inside the house. Helena smiled when she saw him cross the room with confident steps. When the door opened, however, Gabriel's expression hardened. "Helena, there is someone here for you." As she approached, Helena saw Eduardo with a completely different appearance. He was thinner, haggard, and seemed nervous. "Helena," began Eduardo, his voice broken, "I needed to see you." She crossed her arms firmly. "What are you doing here?" "I made a lot of mistakes." He looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't realize how important you were to me until I lost everything." Gabriel remained close, observing the scene calmly, but making it clear that he was there to protect her. "Helena, who is it?" he asked softly. "This is Eduardo, my ex-husband." Her response was calm but full of meaning. Eduardo swallowed hard. "I just wanted to apologize. I was blind, arrogant. You didn't deserve anything I did." Helena sighed, assessing him with eyes that no longer held anger, but an indifference he never expected. "Thank you for saying that, Eduardo. But my life moved on." Gabriel placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by Eduardo. "Who is he?" asked Eduardo, his voice full of pain. "My husband, Gabriel." The simplicity of Helena's response was like a final blow to Eduardo. He hung his head, defeated. "I deserve this." "It's not about deserving, Eduardo. It's about choices. You did yours and I did mine." Without saying anything else, Eduardo turned around and slowly left, leaving Helena and Gabriel at the door. "Are you well?" Gabriel asked, wrapping her in a hug. "Yes," she replied, smiling slightly. "I just feel free." Later that night, as she organized the final details of her home's renovation, Helena felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Gabriel approached her with a glass of wine and asked her to dance. "You've turned this house into something incredible," he said as he twirled her around the room. "Not just the house, Gabriel. I transformed." Helena knew she had left the past behind. Now she could finally live in the present and dream about the future. Days later, Eduardo found himself again in the asylum where he had worked for so many years. Now he was there not by choice, but by necessity. His poor health and lack of financial options forced him to return to the only job he could afford. The environment, once something he despised, now seemed a cruel metaphor for his own life. He helped the elderly with their daily routines, but in every tired expression he saw, he felt a reflection of what he had become. Meanwhile, Helena lived a completely different reality. She and Gabriel were hosting a dinner party at their renovated home, inviting friends over to celebrate a new community project they were both supporting. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Helena said to Gabriel as they set the table. "Like this?" he asked, holding her hand. "Complete." She smiled, and he returned the gesture, gently kissing her forehead. During dinner, Helena realized how much her life had changed. She had freed herself from Eduardo's emotional ties, finding a love that respected and valued her. On the other side of the city, Eduardo was eating dinner alone in his small apartment, remembering the days when he had everything but didn't know how to value it. He picked up an old photo of Helena and sighed, feeling the weight of his choices. As Helena and Gabriel danced to soft music in the candlelit room, she knew that despite all the pain of the past, she had found something precious, genuine love and inner peace. Eduardo, on the other hand, reflected on the lessons of his journey. He wondered if he would ever find redemption,